Sherry Whitley. I'm the Director of Multimedia Development in the Office of Communications and Public Affairs here at Columbia, and I'm your moderator for today's panel. Welcome to Communicating Your Research, Social Media and the Research Cycle. This panel is the first of 4 events in the Research Without Borders speaker series for the 2013-2014 academic year, and it's sponsored by the Scholarly Communications Programs, the Center for Digital Research and Scholarship's Scholarly Communications Program. We have a prescribed format we'd like to follow today. First, I will introduce all of the speakers, 2 of whom will be presenting a sort of coordinated presentation. Then afterward, we will have a question and answer session. Please hold your questions until the question and answer session, and then we'll ask that everyone, because we're also videotaping and live streaming the event, that you come up to the microphone to ask your questions. If there's a line, please line up, queue up on that side. For those of you who are following the event online on Twitter, please use the hashtag RWOB for Research Without Borders. And now I'll introduce our panelists. Adeline Coe is the Director of Digital Humanities and Assistant Professor of Literature at Richard Stockton College in New Jersey. Her work spans the intersections between post-colonial studies and the digital humanities, 19th and 20th century British and Anglophone literature, Southeast Asian and African studies, as well as games in higher education. She is also a core contributor to the Prof Hacker column at the Chronicle of Higher Education, and she runs the Post-Colonial Digital Humanities website and Tumblr with our next panelist, Rupika Rizam. Rupika is Assistant Professor of World Literature and English Education at Salem State University in Massachusetts. She works to address intersections between post-colonial studies and minority discourse in the United States and the role of digital humanities in mediating between the two. She's contributed to post-colonial studies at Emory, which is a digital humanities project, or a repository for post-colonial studies on the web. And as I mentioned earlier, she's runs the Post-Colonial Digital and Humanities website with Adeline. She's also currently serving on the Modern Language Association's Delegate Assembly. Joshua Drew is a lecturer in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Environmental Biology here at Columbia. That department is also known as E3B. There he runs the master's program in conservation biology and teaches and conducts research on the evolution and conservation of marine biodiversity. Joshua is exploring a variety of avenues to bring science to the public, including blogging, making videos of his research, posting them on the web, and working with Helen Scales to better tell the stories from their field of work in Fiji. And apparently that's just a drop in the bucket in terms of the public outreach activities that he's involved in. He also strives to have a diverse lab and is a faculty advocate for LGBTQ students in Columbia University's CU Speak Out group. Laura Zvernovitz is an associate professor in the Center for Higher Education Development at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. She is director of the Open UCT initiative, which can be found online at openuct.uct.ac.za, and she's the founding director of the Center for Educational Technology. She works on various local, continental, and international collaborative projects and can be found blogging at laurazvernovitz.uct.ac.za, and she can also be followed on academia.edu. So I think first up, we're going to have Rupika.
Thank you so much, Sheila, for the introduction, and thank you to Catherine and to Layla for helping arrange this event, and to all of you for showing up and joining us for this conversation. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the origins of DHPOCO, or Post-Colonial Digital Humanities, which is the collaborative project that Adeline and I have developed, and we'll address some of the key concepts that I keep in mind when using social media for my scholarly work. So the project that has actually revolutionized the role of social media in my life is Post-Colonial Digital Humanities. And Post-colonial digital humanities is a number of things. One, it's a community of scholars who are committed to global explorations of race, class, gender, and sexuality, as well as disability within technology. We're also developing it as a theoretical approach to the intersections between post-colonial studies and the digital humanities. And it's also an emergent field of study invested in decolonizing the digital, in foregrounding anti-colonial thought, and disrupting narratives of technological progress. So we have a lot of goals for ourselves. And social media has played a significant role in how we've pursued these goals. So my remarks today, before I turn it over to Adeline, will focus on the three main lessons that I've learned from working with DH POCO. And the first is that social media provides a mode of scholarly invention. The second is that social media can revive the art of play in scholarly inquiry. And finally, that social media, when directed towards actionable outcomes, can yield scholarly transformation. Social media is essentially the only reason that DH POCO exists. Adeline and I met on Twitter, and we discovered there our mutual interest in postcolonial studies and digital humanities. And here is a screenshot from the hashtag DHPOCO, which is the hashtag that we began using to have these conversations on Twitter just between ourselves. And they expanded over time as other people noticed what we were doing and noticed what we were talking about and decided to get involved. And now the actual hashtag is used by quite a number of people. If you search it on Twitter, you can find a lot of different scholarly activities that are being hashtagged with DH POCO by people we've never heard of. And that's wonderful because that was sort of one of our goals. So the hashtag itself served as a site of inquiry, and Twitter was the initial forum of collaboration and experimentation. And one of the reasons that Twitter is so important is that it is both a permanent and an impermanent mode of scholarly communication. And so when I say that, I mean that if you go and look at the hashtag, and this morning I checked, and I got about as far back as March before I just decided I had other things to do, you can really go and see the range of conversations that have been taking place and how they've been developed. And so that archive is there. But at the same time, the tweets get buried easily on other people's timelines, on Twitter, and on your own. And so there's a kind of space to be experimental, be creative, and to sort of feel comfortable that if you say something you're not going to agree with 6 months down the road, it's kind of hard to find it. It's there, it can be found, but you have to dig to find them. So it's a blessing and it's a curse. And so I try to embrace that experimental place. Twitter is also not the only form of social media we've used. This is a screenshot from our Tumblr page, and Tumblr was the next move that we made with postcolonial digital humanities, because we found that Twitter didn't really provide a kind of sustained conversation. And so we moved over to the Tumblr, we created the Tumblr site, and Tumblr became a space where we curated links and posts that we felt like related to postcolonial digital humanities. And Adeline and I were both doing it, but we were doing it independently of each other, and so we'd see blog posts or links, put them up on the Tumblr, tag them with keywords like race, technology, language, and so forth. And over time, what ended up happening is we ended up with an archive of the key concepts that have come to constitute postcolonial digital humanities. And so it allowed us to see, through that active curation and collaborative work, what kinds of themes and trends were emerging in our inquiry. And so what Tumblr also helped do was inculcate a sense of playfulness in our work. And this is one of our comics, because we decided to use the Tumblr site to to do a bit of a comic strip about the key concepts of post-colonial digital humanities that were emerging. So this is us. Sitting at the table on the left is me. Alex Gill is in the middle, and Adeline is on the right-hand side. We created our own avatars because this is a Bitstrips, which is a social comic platform. And then at the podium, we have our stereotypical white male digital humanist who is saying, code is post-racial, data is colorblind, and tech is transnational. And this was sort of meant to be a playful approach to the kinds of ideas that we were interested in. An approach that received varying amounts of appreciation depending on who was looking at them. But these comics were a sort of important move in post-colonial digital humanities because we were sort of playing with these ideas, and our whole this sense of play, I can't stress enough, is important to what we do. So. Part of this playfulness, beyond just making comics, is an ethos of mixing and remixing, of thinking and rethinking, of welcoming and embracing feedback and openness for an ever-widening community. As I mentioned before, the hashtag is something that people we don't know are using. We can just click and we try and make connections with them, but to see that kind of embrace of the ideas behind DHPOCO has been a really significant step. And the other lesson that I can't stress enough as well is that if you really want to try and take social media and use it effectively in your scholarship, you need to leverage social media by attaching actionable goals to it. So if Adeline and I had sort of sat around and just talked on Twitter all day, as we do sometimes, we really wouldn't ended up with a Tumblr site, a comic strip, a website, or any of the other projects that we've been working on. And so not every conversation is going to be worth attaching an actionable goal to it, but it's important to be constantly thinking about where you're making connections in social media and where you see points of contact that can be leveraged into something more. And two examples of this something more are the Postcolonial Studies, a DHPOCO website at dhpoco.org, which was when we decided that even Tumblr was not enough and we needed a space for blog-length posts about post-colonial digital humanities. And if this is something that interests you, we are really happy to have contributors and people who want to join in our work. And another goal, actionable goal, was the Post-Colonial Digital Humanities Summer School. And so we made a month-long in July set of conversations around issues of post-colonial digital humanities, and we had about over 100 people sign up, and a sizable amount of those participated in conversations every week around 4 different readings, and developed a number of interesting ideas and blog posts about what post-colonial digital humanities is. And if you want to know what this comic says, it says, Ghost Stories at DHPOCO Summer Camp. And then the escaped murderer scraped at the car roof, whispering, "Race is irrelevant to DH." So that's what that says. So that's a scary story. So we do welcome you to join us, even if you want to just chat with us, because we really embrace social media as a way to think of this work as just beyond the two of us, and to think about the kinds of scholarly community that we can create around post-colonial digital humanities. So I'm actually going to turn this over to Adeline, who has some further reflections on another actionable goal that has been leveraged out of social media called DHThis, which isn't strictly related to DHPOCO, but I'll let Adeline explain it for you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you to Sheila, Catherine, and Layla as well for having us. So, all right, so today I'm going to talk about DHThis. And DHThis is, as Rupika said, another actionable goal that has come out of post-colonial digital humanities and interactions with different people. It is a website that is an experiment in new forms of publishing, and it's a joint project by Rupsi and me, as well as Alex and two of our collaborators, Jesse Stomel, who is at University of Wisconsin, and Martin Eve, who is in the UK. So what is DHThis? DHThis is really Slashdot or Reddit for the digital humanities. It's basically what we want to do to go beyond the editorial model, where only a few people actually get to curate what the best content is, and have a community curate content. So anybody can sign up to be a user. It's free, and we employ a voting system. So if you sign up, you can submit a story. And the moment you submit a story, it first goes to the new page. So if you see on top, that's the tab saying new. All stories that are up for submission, that have been submitted, will first go to the new page, where they can be upvoted or downvoted. And if you have if you have a minimum of 5 upvotes, then your post will be published on the front page. It will appear the moment you go to DHThis.org. So here you can see all the posts that have been receiving a lot of upvotes by our community. As of right now, I think we have about 225 users signed up, and we just launched this 3 weeks ago. So we're pretty happy with it. We hope that all of you will think about joining as well. So why do we decide to do DHThis? DHThis really, as I said, is an attempt to try to get beyond the editorial model, where what actually gets published or highlighted is only in the hands of a few people. So before DHThis, there's only one complement to what we're doing right now, and that's DH Now, or Digital Humanities Now, which is run out of George Mason and Center for History and New Media. But if you look at the DH Now website, Digital Humanities Now website, it primarily does use an editorial model to showcase content. So DH Now pulls in feeds from anywhere. So you can submit your blog feed or any kind of RSS feed onto their website, and it will fall into what they will consider. But really, when you go to the website, what you will see is what the editors have chosen, which is called editor's choice. That's what's highlighted on the page, rather than an entire community deciding. So we decided to do this in order to try to get away from the editorial model, or try to have a community decide content instead. Now, it's important to also note that DH Now, when they first started, had a very, very similar goal to what we have. So they also started by trying to crowdsource content, but they switched to the editorial model because they found that the posts that they were getting upvoted were not as diverse as they had wanted to. So we decided to start DHThis now, really because we feel that the digital humanities community has been growing so much, and there have been a lot of growing pains along with that growth. And we want to give a space for a community to actually see whether we can produce some kind of diversity on our own within this community. The community has grown. We want a platform that is able to share in this growth and contribute to this growth together. So our main goal really is to provide a platform to share information and give feedback for and within a community. We want to construct a community and allow the community to interact with each other. And that's the goal of DHThis. So you are able to also create groups within DHThis, which will allow for the formation of your own subcommunities. There is currently a group on digital pedagogy, and I think there's also a group on alt-ac. And I'm not sure whether more groups have been added recently, but last I saw there were like 3 or 4 groups. And anybody can create a group. So DHThis really, for us, it serves to demonstrate what not just a few editors, but an entire community finds interesting and engaging about different subjects. And in terms of social media, we feel that it's a helpful way also for people to get initial feedback on their posts. It amplifies what you're already doing in a blog because it signal boosts what you're doing. So if you click on any post on the front page, you will get to this page where you can actually look at comments on the posts, and you can also see who upvoted your story, which will allow you also to maybe make contacts with people who are interested in the same things that you are. Now, there are a lot of limitations to DHThis, and as I said, DHThis is an experiment. And we are looking forward to other iterations of DHThis. The following are the limitations that have been pointed out so far. Some people say, is this really just a popularity contest? And do we really want academia, or what is the best academic work to be a popularity contest? Some people also argue that upvoting and downvoting isn't adequate in terms of really making a solid academic intervention. I had a really interesting conversation about this yesterday because somebody said, well, that's not true. It does reflect the current state of academia, because when somebody turns down your journal article, that's a thumbs down too. Somebody also pointed out that downvoting doesn't really help with the community building process, and would prefer that we only had upvotes rather than downvotes. And some people complain that the categories on our header were not dynamically generated by each user, but rather it's the editors of DH Now, or the 5 people that came out of DH Now, that put the categories in. We started a Google document to collect feedback on additional categories and ways that we can change DHThis, and so we've been changing the categories depending on what our community has been saying. Next steps to DHThis. We might possibly move to Reddit in order to have people be able to generate their own subreddits. And this afternoon, we would really love to see you, if you have time, to join us at Studio Butler at 3 o'clock, where we're going to have a hackathon and theory-a-thon and try to think about the next iterations of DHThis together with as many people as possible. And finally, I think this cat gif kind of summarizes the entire ethos of DHThis. It also, incidentally, is the most popular post on DHThis, which some people are not very happy about, but I think is awesome, personally. But we really want to have as big of a DH tent as possible, which is why we're DHing everything, really. And that is really the ethos, I think, of DHThis. Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to ask you guys to sort of shift epistemological gears a little bit. I'm a natural scientist. I'm a marine biologist by training, and I think the work that I'm presenting in theory aligns really, really well with the other speakers, but because we operate in different epistemological frameworks and we think about things a different way, I'm excited to have the opportunity to show you how natural scientists and how conservation biologists utilize social media and sort of digital literacy to improve conservation out in areas where we don't necessarily have Wi-Fi. There's a disconnect between where there's high areas of biodiversity and there's high connectivity, internet connectivity, and we have to come up with creative approaches to how we approach that, to how we address that. So I want to talk a little bit about digital scholarship and the publication cycle. So we've had, I don't think I need this sort of introduction to what digital scholarship is, because I think we're all fairly well versed in it, but I do want to say that within the natural sciences and within biology, it really has revolutionized how we do almost every aspect of scholarship. From me coming up as a professor, and there's a couple of my students in the audience, and they're probably sick of hearing me talk about how useful Twitter is, to how we formulate ideas, research topics, how we do pre-peer review, all the way through the publication and the dissemination of the information. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can use digital scholarship to improve the type of work that we do. And it requires us to be a little bit creative and a little bit agile in how we seize these new opportunities. So as I said, the social media ecosystem includes a variety of players, and there's no particular best platform to use. Rather, each platform has its own strengths and weaknesses. And rather than trying to sort of shoehorn all of your efforts into one platform, I think it's important to embrace a diversity of options. Twitter might be great for some things, but other things really need the development of a custom social network. And we're starting to see that with the DHPOCO. I mean, I'll show you our version of that, which I had no idea. And that's great to see that sort of convergent evolution of digital ideas. But before you do it, before you invest those costs into coming up with a digital platform to accentuate your research, it's really worthwhile sitting down and literally writing out what you want to get out of it and who the target audiences are and what's the best way to engage them. Don't just sort of broadcast spray your ideas. You want to make sure that you're more targeted about it. So I want to show you two worked examples of how this plays out in the South Pacific. One is a program that I ran when I was a postdoctoral research fellow at the Field Museum in Chicago called Conservation Connections, which is a multi-platform research project which links high schoolers from the west side of Chicago with their peers in the West Pacific, specifically a high school in Suva, the capital of Fiji. And then I want to go back in and talk a little bit more about how, as a conservation biologist, we've used Twitter to improve and accelerate our own research. And so sort of talk about the benefits as, particularly as a young scholar, of getting in on Twitter and using that to make a name for yourself. But ultimately, I'm an ichthyologist, right? So I want to know how I can use these tools to teach about fish. So here we are in Chicago, and I've got examples of fish that we've taken from the Field Museum, and I'm having the students from the high school make short video documentaries about it using flip cams, right? So how can we use this technology to make them focus on the collections that I bring to them? And can we use these digital technology to enhance how we teach, and by extension, how we can disseminate that information to engage students? This young woman here in the foreground, I don't think she's here today. She's actually now a freshman at Barnard. She was an intern of mine back in Chicago, and she sort of followed me out here, which is great. So I'm very excited to continue to be able to work with Charlotte. But ultimately, what I really wanted to do with this project in Fiji and Chicago was how can we get the students to teach each other about what their cultures are like. So this is an example of, this is the L. It's the public transportation system in Chicago. And that's a Fijian school bus. And so this is how the student population that I was engaged with, how they got to school. And even that fundamental act of just getting to school belies the cultural diversity that we're engaging. And I think digital scholarship and digital humanities allows us the opportunity for them to tell their own stories and to create powerful bonds that aren't necessarily associated with learning about the fish, right? But by creating this forum, we're able to get this sort of cross-cultural and cross-diversity communication started. So the project, Conservation Connections, sponsored by the MacArthur Digital Learning and Media Grant. It was a partnership between the Field Museum and Chicago Public Schools. And basically, we created a whole suite of digital tools to bring these high schools together. Specifically, right, we didn't just want to have them hang out on the internet, right? That wasn't an educational enough experience, right? We wanted to teach them about coral reef biology. We wanted them to, at the end of the day, be able to specify individual organisms, and we wanted to provide them with a suite of digital skills so that as they graduated from high school and started to start their own careers, they had the ability to navigate the intellectual dangers that are potentially out there for young students, learning how to create an online presence and learning how to manage that presence and learning what is appropriate and what is inappropriate for you to have as a person engaging in professional behavior for the first time. So we wanted to bring these two schools together. One was Marist Brothers Academy in Suva, Fiji, and the other was Voice Academy in the Austin neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. These are very different schools, as you can imagine. But they were both populated by students the same age, and that was sort of the key that we had to bring them together. Now, what we wanted to do was arm them with the ability to tell their own stories. So we created a custom digital social networking site called YReef. And YReef combines some gameplay to give them basic information about what a parrotfish was, but also provided them with an opportunity for them to upload videos. So we had students either using collections in Chicago or in case of the Fijian students going out and filming these coral reefs and uploading these videos and using them as an opportunity to have joined discussions about conservation and ecology. These videos, for instance, there was a parrotfish group, and there was a Chicago parrotfish group and a Fijian parrotfish group. And what they would do was upload videos, and the Fijian parrotfish group would upload their video, and it would be reviewed in a peer fashion by the Chicago ones. And they'd say, hey, that's great. You saw that parrotfish have 2 sets of jaws. But what you didn't say is that when parrotfish sleep at night, they weave themselves a snot cocoon to hide their scent from predators. It's true. None of you are in my theology class, but we're dealing with that shortly, right? So these are the way that they were able to get that information across at a peer-to-peer level using digital communications. And it wasn't necessarily an authoritarian voice telling them about it, but rather it was young students engaging with each other. And the online source was this fijireef.ning.com, so it was a really easy source to set up. We had parental authorizations because we're dealing with minors, and if anybody wants to talk about the nuts and bolts, I can do that later. But the key was that we created this digital space that allowed students in Chicago and Fiji to talk to each other without having to worry about the Pacific Ocean lying between them. That was really great. And this was structured around collections-based learning. So as a natural history museum, our real strengths lie in having these biodiversity time capsules, these collections, preserved fish, and invertebrates. And we were able to take them out and show the kids in Chicago what these things looked like. And for many of them, it was the first time they'd held a fish outside of a sandwich context, right? So these kids grew up in kind of a rough neighborhood, and they didn't necessarily have access to biodiversity, at least, certainly not coral reef biodiversity. So it was great to be able to take the collections to them. Their Fijian colleagues, were fortunate in that they lived fairly close to the reef, and they had a much more intimate relationship with the biodiversity, and they were able to share their stories about oh, that thing tastes really good if you cook it with a little bit of lime juice and chili. They were able to sort of share their knowledge about these species with their Chicago collaborators. Now, what we ended up doing was we charged the students with coming up with solving a conservation issue. And to do that, the Fijian students went to a village and they interviewed fishermen in Fijian about what they thought the major problems facing the reef were. The Fijian students then transcribed those interviews and created a short document outlining what the major threats were. Then, the Fijian and the Chicago students worked together to not only identify what the threat was, but come up with culturally sensitive ways to address that. And as an educator, this was great because I basically stepped back and let the teens work amongst themselves to come up dynamically with an appropriate way to address a real-world issue. And what they ended up coming up with was a PSA about pollution. So this village was a little bit downstream of the capital. People in the capital would throw their trash in the reef, on the ocean, and it would wash up on this village's reef. So even though this village had done a really good job of having rubbish bins and whatnot, it was still getting inundated with garbage from upstream areas. And they realized that that was one of the major threats. Garbage is also a big problem in Chicago, so that was something that the Chicago kids could sort of identify with. And they ended up coming up with this PSA, which we're able to show on the one TV channel in Fiji, as well as in the movie theaters. So
and have you seen that video of me choking off the filet sandwich with that nasty plastic bag? You should know, litter is not just bad for the ocean, it's bad for us.
When you throw pollution in the water, it can kill the coral and hurt the fish. So chances are, if you litter, it affects your lunch and your life.
Right, so it may not win any sort of directorial awards anytime soon, but I'm really, really proud of these kids who were, at the time, were 14, 15, and 16, and they were learning the skills of composing shots, of telling a narrative in a video fashion, and trying to make sure that what made sense to them as young students in Chicago would translate to their peers out in Fiji. So I actually love that video. I think they did a fantastic job, and I'm really, really proud of them. And many of them, two of the three of them, the third hasn't graduated yet, two of the three of them use that as part of their application package to get into college. They're the first students in their family to get into college. So there's a lot that came out of this program that I'm really, really excited about. So, you know, it shows how digital scholarship can focus on building these unique collaborations and having a real two-way communication. And social media was really the only way that we could do this, because frankly, we weren't going to be calling up Fiji and having them talk over the phone. You know, it had to be done using social media. And, you know, this is really, when we talk about broader impacts for funding agencies, this is the sort of stuff that really makes a difference. My work is on describing biodiversity in fish fauna in Fiji, and that's great, and I love my work. But this is the sort of stuff that takes that, you know, alpha taxonomy that I do, that describing species, and makes it matter, you know, gets students engaged. And I hope that, you know, in 15 or 20 years, these students who are in Fiji, when, you know, they take these lessons to heart, and that when I need to go apply for research permits, I hope that it's my former students who are now in the position to grant me those research permits. You know, I hope that they take this information and carry it on into their professional lives. So I want to shift to the second worked example, which is a new paper that we have out of looking at Twitter and the research cycle. So the Conservation Connection used a wide variety of different formats. And I did live tweet the trip out there. And I've been fortunate enough to tweet 3 expeditions now, one to Papua New Guinea, one to Fiji, and one to Belize. And it's been a great way to get people following along and seeing what marine biology is like out in the field. And I will be doing it again next summer, so hopefully you guys can follow along with that. But we wanted to take a more critical approach and a data-driven approach at looking at how come Twitter can help scientists. And so this is done with collaboration with Emily Darling, David Schiffman, and Isabel Coate, who we all met over Twitter, and we basically planned out this entire paper over Twitter. So that's the first way that I think Twitter can help, is that it exposes you to a variety of researchers who you may not necessarily know. And we talk about this, or we conceptualize this as creating a larger virtual department. So you can see, this is a log scale. So the department the group of people that you interact with over Twitter, your Twitter followers, tends to be tends to be about 2 orders of magnitude larger than the academic department that you're situated in. There's a correlation, but basically the take-home point is that if you're active on Twitter, you have a much more diverse and engaged group of people to interact with, people to bounce ideas off of, people to do pre-peer review with, people to tell you about research funding opportunities that are coming down the line, people who may be willing to invite you out to do presentations, maybe to participate in unique research opportunities. Basically, it's a great way for you to expand your physical set of people that you interact with. And it's not just I have a whole bunch of followers, you know, like I'm a big baseball fan, right? And so like I actually, you know, I'm followed by the White Sox and the Mariners, right? And that's great, and it's kind of cool that like these professional baseball teams, but that doesn't help me on my day-to-day business, right? So what we wanted to do was we broke down a subset of the followers, and we wanted to see who was paying attention to the things that we were saying. And so this is the look at all 4 of our followers. And, you know, most of them are science students. David and Emily, David's still a PhD student, Emily is now just graduated. So it kind of makes sense that their peers would be along there. But if you look, we have academic scientists, we have environmental NGOs, we have media, we have scientific journals. We have people who are following us who we need to be engaged with in order to get our message across. You know, a big part of being on Twitter is owning your research narrative. And these are the people who care about your research narrative. And that's true no matter what sort of academic or scholarly pursuit you're in. If you carefully cultivate your Twitter presence, you're going to be linked up with people who care about what you say. Now, the other thing that was interesting that came out of this is that there was definitely a skew towards years since degree and Twitter engagement, let's say. And some people say, well, then that doesn't really matter because you're not necessarily interacting with the movers and shakers. And I disagree, not only because I just recently got my PhD, but I disagree because I say that you are being engaged with the cutting edge of communication and the cutting edge of science. And just like those young Fijian gentlemen who I interacted with, who I hope in 10 to 15 years I'll be getting permits from, I hope that as this bar progresses, as they graduate and they move on into government, as they move on into industry or into academic circles, that these are people who I have established a long-term relationship with, and these are the people who are doing the really interesting work, who are making this, the scientific discoveries that are really pushing forth the envelope. And so those are really, really interesting people to be engaged with. I'm not saying that there's not a use for folks who may not have, who may be more senior, because certainly there is, but there are many reasons why they may not be engaged, partly as they don't necessarily have time. But what I am saying with this is that when you engage people who are in the process of getting their degrees, you're really seeding yourself and you're making a name for yourself for the next generation. So as that generation moves through, you're a known commodity to them. This is not our work, but this is published work showing that there is a relationship between what they unfortunately called tweetations, which is Twitter mentions. So it's like Twitter plus citations. I didn't coin the term, but so let's just call them Twitter mentions. All right, so there's a relationship between Twitter mentions and later citations. So in natural sciences, getting your paper cited is sort of the coin of the realm, and the more citations you have, the better your papers seem to have been. And there's a really strong correlation between people who are talking about your paper over Twitter and 2 to 3 years later, as it turns to get the paper churned out, people who are citing your paper. Honestly, I get probably about 30 or 40% of the new papers that I get excited about, I hear about over Twitter. There's just so many journals out there churning out so many different papers that I don't have time to read all those table of contents. But there are people who I trust. And if people who I trust on Twitter say, hey, this is a really cool paper, you should check it out, I'm far more likely to click on that link and engage with that research than if I just get a table of contents from an academic journal, because it has that sort of peer stamp of approval ahead of time. I think that's a really important way that Twitter can help you with your research. Now, lastly, I do want to put some caveats. Twitter may seem like a small, intimate conversation when you're having with your buddies, but as we saw, it stays around there forever. And so it is a matter of public record, and that can get you in trouble. These are just 3 within the past 6 months of 2 academics and 1 man of questionable taste really getting in trouble for what they had on their Twitter profiles. So you are not limited to having a single Twitter profile, and if you tend to be on the ranty side of the spectrum, I suggest you get one that doesn't have your name associated with it. It's very easy to do, and it's a good way to sort of partition what you want to say to your students, for instance, versus what you want to say to your peers, because there are ramifications for that. So just a caveat before you jump in all rant pants of fire and start going out on that. So lastly, I want to just sort of summarize here. I think social media can really offer new avenues for research, but you need to be strategic about where you place your efforts. Being present and active on social media can really shrink the world, bringing together students and colleagues who would not normally have a chance to interact. And you can find really, really novel and amazing conversations take place in that. One of the best conversations we had was when the Fijians were telling the Chicago students what the special customs were when you enter into a village. And there's a very ritualized way that you engage with people in a Fijian village. And the Chicago students said, well, this is what you do when you come into our neighborhood. And they live in a rough neighborhood, and they basically were giving safety tips for people who weren't familiar with that neighborhood with how to navigate their space. And that was a really fascinating conversation to see how both groups incorporated social mores and environmental ideas and how they communicated them, what they prioritized. And that would have never happened without this strong social media presence that we had curated. And I think that's the other thing too, is it's a way to sort of engage people in developing countries as well, provided that they have the technology, and it's getting more and more widespread. So I was able to live tweet the last expedition we had in Fiji, I had 3G out on the reef, and I was a little amazed that I had that. But we were able to tweet and do blog posts literally while we were out on the reef, and that's great that we're starting to be able to engage more and more places into the broader communication and the broader conversation. So with that, thank you.
Well, first of all, thanks very much for this adventure, Skyping me in from the other end of the world. I'm delighted to be part of this conversation from the University of Cape Town. It's an evening here and it's a public holiday, it's Heritage Day. And I'm going to look at social media, and particularly I'm interested in realigning networks and impact. But to start with, I just want a couple of introductory comments about the affordances of digital technology and the internet. And those of you who are media specialists, forgive the term affordances. I still think it's the most useful way of talking about what new digital technologies make possible. And a couple of those affordances which have already been mentioned in the previous presentations, that new technology means that content and communication is granular, probably one of the most important dimensions in terms of breaking things down and taking them apart and putting them together again. And that means that content and communication are particularly dynamic. And communication becomes visible, it becomes a form of content, quite different from an analog terrain. Also dramatically different is that sharing is free and easy, and it means multiplying, not dividing. So when you share in an analog space, of course you divide something up, and you each have a part. In the online space, everyone has a bit, and that's quite profound, I think. And certainly in terms of the social media dimensions, the read-write web changes the relationships and the dynamics profoundly. So as we've all been saying so far, the digital enables openness. It also enables a lot more closeness, but that's not the topic of the talk today. And of course, this is all premised on the internet. I love this image of the internet. It shows all the nodes. And the wonderful thing is if you took those 10 nodes in the middle, bearing in mind that the internet is simply the infrastructure, it's like the railway lines that the web runs on. If you take away those central nodes, you're still going to have a networked society. So the fact that the internet is distributed really does make an extraordinary difference in terms of the possibilities of the relationships. And no one said it better than Castells. He wrote this quite a long time ago now, but he was so prescient. And he said that in the past social networks were more limited in different spheres. Of course we had globalization there, but networks were more exclusive. And what the internet makes possible is more inclusive networks. So how does this all play out in the research cycle? What I've put on the screen is an archetype of the research cycle. The very basic conceptualization, data collection, data analysis, and findings, translation, and engagement. I think this works for pretty much every discipline. And associated with all the standard stages of the research cycle are particular forms of content and particular relationships. So at a certain stage, scholars talk to scholars, at another stage they talk to the community, and at another stage they talk to students. But in the changing scholarly terrain, things change quite profoundly. At the conceptualization stage, we're used to conceptualization, the start of a research project being individual, being private, possibly stored on a piece of paper or on a desktop. And what we're really seeing quite in a very profound sense is research sharing, starting at the birth of a research idea. And I'll give you an example where just last month I was writing a grant proposal about online visibility, and I happened to idly put online, I'm working on a grant proposal on Twitter, and within minutes I had 2 replies from 2 people I didn't know, one of whom was at the University of Illinois, and one of whom was in Kenya. And it so happened that last week, in other words, a week later, I was due to go to Illinois, and I picked up this conversation with this person in Illinois, and I'm now working with a colleague of hers. Similarly, the woman in Kenya who's writing about the same topic will come to the workshop that we'll run in Nairobi should we get the grant. So it's an astonishing example of how, at the very outset, one can make these connections. Also, at the outset, we started a bibliography for the issue of looking at online presence, because we were planning to put together a handbook. I run something called Open UCT, which is about opening scholarship at the University of Cape Town. And we decided that we would make that bibliography available on Delicious. We put out the publication, and we've kept the bibliography live. So when we do the second version, we will have that bibliography, and in the meantime, it's available to anybody who wants to use it. Another example is an open science for development project we're working on at the moment. We made the project proposal available at the outset. It can be read by anyone on Google Docs. And the whole process of developing the research questions through a collaborative process has been blogged about, and will continue to blog as we go through the entire process. But it's not just about the conceptualization. To a large extent, it's about data. And I think this is where we've had some wonderful examples. We've seen some wonderful examples in both the sciences and the humanities, where data is no longer private, or doesn't have to be private. It can become text mined, it can become linked. We can see crowdsourcing, we can see, once again, shareability and openness. There are a lot of examples of shared data in the sciences, so I thought I would show you an example of some really interesting heritage data that is shared. It's the Zamani project, which is about the African cultural heritage and landscape. And what is shared are 3D models, laser scans, landscape models, remote sensing, contextual images and videos, and so on. So these can be found at Aluka, and they can be used and reused. And in fact, they've turned out to have enormous historical significance, because some of the places which have been 3D models have been made of them have been damaged in natural disasters or man-made disasters too. So these are quite extraordinary examples of digital data that has value in a number of ways, both for society and for scholars. In the data space, what's particularly interesting is the rise of citizen science, because one is used to the data coming from the experts, from the scholars, and even in South Africa and in Africa, where connectivity with computers is a problem, mobile phones are so ubiquitous that it really is possible for anybody, anywhere, who has access to a mobile phone to send in data. And the Animal Demography Unit at the University of Cape Town is extremely successful in collecting data with digital through all sorts of social media, particularly Facebook. And as I mentioned, it's a public holiday here, so this past weekend, the Animal Demography Unit, in fact, go to the Facebook page, called to anyone who was out and about and said, if you're going around this weekend, please take your camera with and contribute to the virtual museum project. And the virtual museum is a whole range of animals, mammals, frogs, scorpions, reptiles, etc. And what one sees on this extremely busy and active Facebook page is that people then reshare and call upon others to collect data for the Animal Demography Unit. And here's an example of, let's make this coming long weekend a data submission record breaker. Continuing through the research cycle, of course, we are used to outputs which are stable, authoritative, and text-based, and we're seeing the rise of multimodal, rich, dynamic, rich media, and new types of journals. We're also seeing new kinds of articles. I think many people, and particularly the last speaker, will be familiar with the articles in PLOS ONE, where the granularity of the medium allows for articles, images which can be downloaded separately, data sets which are stored. I think PLOS always shares them in Figshare, so making the data sets themselves completely separate and reusable, and of course the references as well. But probably the most interesting dimension from the point of view of this talk today is the way that it is possible to discuss, cite, save, and share content through these kinds of formal journals. And what's interesting is that this is available and enriching for both scholars and for the general public. So these examples here show the way that articles are shared on Mendeley, which is used by scholars for scholarly collaboration, but also discussed on Facebook, 135 comments on Facebook, 145 shares. This is an article about white sharks in False Bay, which is here in Cape Town. We're also seeing the rise of new kinds of outputs. The Popular Memory project here in Cape Town at the university, which has collected stories from people who live on the streets. And what we can see is that there are audios which are being listened to 6,500 times, and different types of outputs, documentaries, books, more traditional types, and extensive photographic exhibitions. What we're also seeing is the rise of new types of journals. We've got a video journal, for example, the Journal of Visualized Experiment, which is a PubMed indexed video journal. And they include both text and videos and engagement with authors as well. And last but not least, going through the cycle, of course we have to mention the rise of open education resources, which are multimodal, include blogging, and in the South African context, we've got some very interesting examples of open textbooks. The Siyavula project has got maths and science open textbooks in all formats, online, computer, and interestingly on feature phones, not just smartphones, using the something called Mixit, which is online chat, which runs on feature phones. You don't need a smartphone, and they're making open textbooks available. So So what this all really adds up to is that the notion of clearly demarcated audiences, scholar to scholar, at one particular moment in the cycle really gets thrown up in the air, and we see that online content is available to all, and Twitter plays an amazing role here. And unfortunately, you won't be able to see the example which I have to show you, which is a paper written by academics at the University of Cape Town, the relationship between intimate partner violence amongst South African men, and how this has moved across Twitter, first being discussed by scholars, and then moving into the advocacy space, and then moving into the advocacy space that is really NGOs in rural areas, quite a different type of audience from what the one might have imagined, and certainly which would have been possible. And those audiences are not the ones who would be likely to have access to those articles normally. And certainly they wouldn't know about them. So really, what we have is the entire scholarship research cycle being turned upside down and inside out by social media, with engagement and participation possible at any stage throughout the cycle, earlier than previously, and with audiences that were simply not possible before. Which brings me back to Castells' optimism. Does the internet make networks more inclusive and easy to participate in? I think that we can see many examples where traditional core periphery relationships are being replaced by network relationships. And perhaps this discussion that we're having today is an example of it, even if the technology is not helping us. So we do see social media realigning relationships between the global north and between the global south, within and across countries, between the haves and the have-nots, and I think the previous speakers' examples really showed that beautifully. The role of social media in the traditional scholar-to-scholar space is well known and has been shown through various studies. But what's really exciting, I think, is the possibilities for social media in the development space. So the scholar-to-community, community-to-scholar relationship that gets opened up, because the value of scholarship is in use and in reuse and in its relevance. And it's something that scholars struggle with, and certainly reward systems are very much skewed in favor of prestige rather than relevance. But social media does allow scholars ways of engaging with both prestige and relevance. And the rise of altmetrics, I think, is making it possible to measure and show the value of that kind of development-related and community-related activities. Of course, the challenge is to have those markers of measures taken seriously within the academy, but that is something for the discussion. So I think, in conclusion, I would argue that the integration of social media throughout the research cycle does afford valuable ways of extending the use, value, and influence of all aspects of research beyond its traditional narrow dimensions. And it also reconstitutes networks to enable participation beyond geography and previous forms of exclusion. And potentially, it does possibly restructure power relations in knowledge production and dissemination. And thanks for your patience.
This has been an amazing discussion so far, and I have tons of questions. I'm sure everyone else does too. Oh, great. Oh, perfect. So we now have a mobile mic. So yeah, if people could maybe just raise your hand and we'll pass the mic along.
So thanks to everyone for presenting today. Really fantastic discussion. This question might be a little bit more focused for Laura, but I'm wondering, we've been talking a lot about science communication and connecting researchers with other researchers and connecting these studies with the public and allowing them to access this information. I'm wondering, what do you think has taken science so long to sort of move in this citizen science direction and use the public as participants that can greatly contribute? And are there limitations that you see?
I think I did touch on it when I was talking. I think the biggest thing that's holding many of these innovations back is the reward system in universities, in traditional universities. And the University of Cape Town is no different. It's the top-ranked university in Africa. Academics we don't have tenure systems like you do, but we get promoted if we publish in certain types of journals rather than doing exciting and innovative work with social media. And so the kinds of studies that we're doing to try and prove its value are really at the edges, because the reward systems still reward very conservative and conventional scholarly practices.
You started talking about using Twitter among professional colleagues. You talked about the sort of dangers of inappropriate messages getting out there. I'm just familiar with Twitter as, you dump everything out to the world, including the sandwich you had for lunch, and everyone, shares it. And is there a particular protocol on Twitter when you want to form that more professional community, or is it kind of DIY and you just have to use some very general parameters to build something that will be safe, professional, attract only certain people, and so on?
I think partitioning your interests amongst different accounts is a good way to go. So that if you have an account that is about your love of donuts and how ecstatic you were when you went to Voodoo Donuts in Portland and they had amazing stuff that you just couldn't help but share about how awesome the Old Dirty Bastard donut was, which is a real one that is Oreos and peanut butter, and it's fantastic. Most people don't care about that, so you could have like a I Heart Donuts account, and on that account you can, go to town, wax eloquently about your love of donuts, and people who love donuts will follow on to that, and you will build a donut-centric community. But if you're also, an astrophysicist and you're stoked that Voyager has passed through the Oort cloud and is now in interstellar space, which happened and is really amazing if you think about it, because Voyager was built back in '77 and it's still on chugging. It's great. That might be a place for a different type of account that generates a different group of followers. And there might be some intersection between Oort cloud and donut fanaticism, but probably not as much. So just learning to sort of partition what is your, in my case, I'm talking about feminism in baseball on my private account, and I'll talk about feminism on my professional account too, but I talk more about fish and feminism on my professional account, and the intersection between them, that it sort of divulges, and so people will follow accounts for what they want to get out of it.
I actually disagree a little bit.
Let's go.
Only because I've been on this crusade against the co-optation of fall by the pumpkin spice latte that I tweet about almost every day. And so if you want to join me, it's Academics Against the Co-optation of Fall by Gourds. But in a sense, more seriously, my own work has been enriched by constantly probing at intersections of ideas that I may not on the surface assume are linked to each other. And so while I don't really see the colonization of fall by pumpkin spice latte as something I would pursue academically, I do like to sort of preserve a space where I can not sort of feel like I'm sort of keeping my digital humanities on one Twitter, keeping my post-colonial on another. Otherwise, there would be no post-colonial digital humanities. So I think about it in terms of building networks, in terms of what I can sort of put out there in addition to what I can get out of it. One of the ways that I've built my Twitter network was by following people and communicating with them and noticing who they're talking to, noticing who shares similar interests, and building it that way. I don't really talk much about personal things on Twitter. I keep that for one of my Facebook accounts. So I did separate my Facebook accounts. I have the one where I talk about donuts, and I have the one where I just talk about academic work. But I find that sort of still having those tweets about lattes, does humanize the Twitter feed and take it away from being a kind of instrumental, careerist kind of Twitter feed that's solely oriented towards self-promotion. And I'm particularly aware of this as a woman and as a woman of color, that, there are certain perceptions about what I'm putting out there publicly. And so if I can kind of build affective connections as well, then it feels more like a community and a community of scholars rather than, say, just sort of an account dedicated to a certain topic. So I have a different approach, but I respect yours.
Hi. I actually have two questions, but they're both quite short. The first one goes back to we were talking about rewards for intellectual work or for work in the digital humanities. And I'm thinking, on a strategic level, if I dare say this, for junior faculty members, what kind of time do you put into your DH lives? And at the risk of being, vulgar, does that time count when it comes to necessary professional advancement and inclusion in the community of the university? That's one question. And then my second question actually also has to do with community, and I'm being a bit of a devil's advocate. It's specifically related to the DHThis website. I just was hoping, perhaps, Adeline, you could talk about, is there some sort of de facto advantage to community choice or some sort of ethical good to opening up curation to everyone? So that's not just that's not a rhetorical question, it's a real question. So, yeah.
It's a good question about why are we wanting to put curation in the hands of a community rather than a few people. And I think the answer goes back to some of the debates that have been going on within the digital humanities over the last 5 years about what defines the digital humanities, who's considered to be part of the digital humanities, what projects are really considered digital humanities projects. Are people who call themselves digital humanists actually digital humanists? So these are a series of very, very fraught debates and questions that have been going around for at least the last 5 years. And DHThis is really an attempt to try to find a space for more people to answer that question or to participate in answering that question, rather than having different sources where different decrees are being declared on different mountaintops. This is supposed to be many voices working together, hopefully, to talk about it. That's why I think that's why we chose to launch DHThis, in my opinion. Is that your opinion too?
It is my opinion. I do what Adeline says. Do you want to go? No. I could just say a little bit about the question of whether it counts as a junior scholar. I think that question really depends on the kind of institution you're at and where you are in terms of within your career. So I'm in a tenure track position at a master's institution. And at a master's institution with a strong mission for undergraduate teaching, it feels to me like there's latitude to make it count. and that I find ways to do it. I'm trying to kind of cultivate an interest in digital humanities at the university. It's only my first year, but I've already spoken with some people about it and to develop some ideas for a longer term plan about how digital humanities might strengthen some of the work of our department, and we can build on work that scholars are already doing in our department. So for me, there's space, I think, to make it count. I'm very cognizant of making sure I meet the benchmarks and the criteria for tenure and promotion through means that are easily legible to the administration as forms of scholarship and forms of pedagogy, but at the same time using the fact that I'm at a master's institution rather than an R1 as sort of a little more latitude than I imagine I would have at another kind of institution. But I really think that people who are junior scholars who are doing this work, it's sort of unfortunately incumbent upon us to figure out how to make it visible and how to make it sort of intelligible to the people who are going to be making these decisions about tenure and promotion.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's incredibly valuable. In my field, the coins of the realm are citations, so publications and grants. And I've already gotten several grants that I've become aware of through Twitter. People say, hey, there's a heads up, this grant's coming out, and getting that heads up is instrumental in procuring those. And I think more and more granting agencies like to see broader impacts, like to see the idea of, in my case, we live tweeted this event. I actually put a line in my previous grant to bring a science communicator out with me. So we had somebody do all the blog posts and the live tweeting of what the science was like. And I think that made that grant a much more compelling offer, because the granting agency saw that the research that they were funding was having a much broader reach than just simply describing new species in Fiji. From a citation point, what Laura was talking about is this alt-metric, this individual article level basis is really, really exciting, because you're no longer subject to being lumped in with a bunch of other papers that are variable quality and having that homogenized as your impact factor. I have a really good friend who's up for tenure at LSU, and they removed the individual impact factor of the journals and instead put the number of citations that each article got in. So they were incorporating that individual level alt metric in his tenure package. And more professors, as they go up for tenure, are putting in their social media presence, saying that they have, not like clout, because that's problematic, but they are putting in things like, I have 1,700 Twitter followers, and this, when I tweeted about this new paper that it came out, it got 15 shares and 27 replies, showing that the research that they're doing is engaging the broader scholarly community. So you don't want to have like a 4-hour-a-day block set aside to do Twitter, but I live in the Bronx, so I have like a 25-minute commute on the bus into work every day, and that's 50 minutes a day that I'm basically just sitting at my phone. So I have that found time where there's more productive things to do than just sort of staring at the Dr. Z, advertisement on the top of the bus.
Hi, I want to thank all the speakers. It's been really interesting so far. My question is, do you have any practical tips as far as engaging people using social media? I recently started a Twitter and a Facebook account for a project, and I'm just wondering, how did you begin with getting people to interact? So just any sort of practical things that you found along the way would be very helpful.
When I started my Twitter account, what I did first was to retweet things that I found interesting. And then I started tweeting about academic news that I found interesting. And I got more followers simply because I was useful. I mean, people just saw me as a useful news source, really. I didn't really talk about what I thought until a lot later. But I think that people follow accounts that they find useful. And if you find a way to be useful, then your account will probably be followed. And the biggest thing about engaging people that when you have more followers, you should be very mindful of is don't feed the trolls. There are a lot of trolls everywhere. Twitter is no exception. Facebook's no exception as well. But if you find that people are being unproductive in the discussion, it's best to not engage in that debate.
I would also say that this is similar to what Adeline's saying, is that Twitter is a gift economy. If you are giving into it, this ties into what Adeline's saying about being useful. You know, if you're giving into it, then you'll get back from it as well, and you'll get it in followers too. I mean, one of the other things you can do is look at who the people you already know are following. Also, people on Twitter make lists, and you can find people's lists or see the lists that people are on, and so you'll see lists that'll just say academics or digital humanists or ichthyologists or, you know, a range of different specialties and different disciplines, and so you can go up to those lists and see who's there, check out what they're tweeting about, see if you think it's going to be interesting, see if somebody you want to talk to, and think about it in that way.
Yeah,
can I say something?
Absolutely.
Sorry about the advertising, but if you go to the OpenUCT site and you look at the guidelines for increasing academics' visibility, there are lots of tips and suggestions. So that's openuct.uct.ac.za.
And I would just say we have a hashtag for this, the RWOB, and that's a great way to click on that to see who's actually here. And if you're here, you're obviously interested in this topic, and if these people are here, they're interested in the topic. So probably you have a useful dialogue amongst yourselves. I don't know what field you're in, but there are probably large annual meetings, and those large annual meetings are also probably being tweeted with the hashtag. And that's a great way to engage other people who are interested in things that you're interested in. And then just to reiterate, it can't just be, this is my paper, this is my paper, this is my paper. That's boring. You know, that's like an RSS feed. You want to have some degree of yourself leak through and have some sort of your personality, because that's just more interesting to follow, and that's ultimately who you are. And that's going to make it a much more dynamic and rewarding interaction.
Okay, I found myself with a microphone here, so I'll ask my question. So we've seen many compelling instances of social media for collecting data and for discovery. I'm still a little curious about how you guys navigate the keeping a critical perspective in a social media environment. I mean, we've talked about the trolls, and we've talked about like finding people who have shared interests, but I'm wondering whether there isn't a danger of sort of eroding the middle ground between people who may agree on some things and not others, and that sort of the critical discourse of academia, if it in these environments threatens to get flattened out into likes and dislikes. And how you ward against that, I guess, is my question.
That's a really good point. I think that it becomes clear to you when you interact with people who is really trying to engage with you and have a discussion versus somebody who is simply trying to shut whatever you're saying down. So, I mean, my personal strategy is to always assume the best of people until proven, or assume the best of Twitter accounts until proven otherwise. If somebody is being hostile, who I don't know especially is being hostile, just sending tweets which do not want to engage but simply are trying to shut me down in some way, then I will not engage with that. But if anybody who has something critical and constructive to say, yeah, I think that's a great thing to be able to do that. But it's about being able to, I think one has to engage with the account to see whether somebody is trying to be a troll or not.
So, can I say something?
Yeah.
Sure.
So my rule on Twitter is if they're wearing a bikini, I block them. The power of social media is the power of loose ties. And it simply extends the loose ties and the networks that are available. The critical engagement is the same as in the face-to-face world. The virtual world, the inequalities and the power issues and the issues of critical considerations are the same. They might become a little bit more complex, but I think the same rules apply actually.
So we came into a situation amongst my peers where we were debating these topics over Twitter, and they were getting huge and hard to follow because it was truncated at 140 characters. And eventually what we ended up doing was saying, let's actually talk about this. And so we have a bi-weekly Google Plus Hangout with Pub Science is the hashtag. And those are an opportunity. We set aside 2 hours where we talk about issues that we care about. I'm a biologist. Many of my people I interact with are, but they aren't ichthyologists. Many of them are cancer biologists or pulmonary physiologists. And so we'll talk about bigger issues like, is it reasonable to spend money to pay for open access when that money, to put your journal out for open access when that money could either fund a student to go to a conference or fuel another experiment? And thankfully, thanks to Catherine, wherever you are, I don't have to deal with that issue here because Columbia helps pay for open access. But how to utilize finite resources was a really great issue, and it wasn't that deserved more than 140 characters worth of conversation. And so we recognized the limitations, recognized that we all had intricate things to say, and moved it to a social media platform that was better suited for more in-depth discussion. We're doing one on the 18th, I think, of October, about work-life balance, right? This is something that we all deal with, and how I have 2 small kids, and how do I make sure that I'm a good father as well as being a good scholar? And you can't do that adequately in 140 characters, and so we're going to shift the venue to an appropriate platform to really delve into it. And I think that was one of the core points that you're getting to, is how do you move beyond sort of facile 140 character conversation bits. Yeah.
I would also add that in my experience, I don't sense a flattening of academic discourse, instead a magnification of it. And so what I think is important, and this ties into what Adeline is suggesting, is to approach the discussions with the same kind of ethical impulse and ethical obligations that we would bring to any scholarly conversation, because they can get heated more quickly on Twitter than I have ever seen in person. And so, trying to remember sort of what it is that how we practice respect for other people's intellectual work is a really important key to navigating that kind of magnification.
Hi, I've got the mic now. Can you hear me? Yep. I'm a social scientist and anthropologist, and I just love the delicious nature of all the different levels. What we're talking about here, everywhere from crowdsourcing data on human interactions to the social networks to the metadata we produce. And I just have 3 scary little words I want to ask you if you've encountered this: institutional review boards. And how do you talk to them when you're talking about producing this kind of data, which is very, very slippery?
So my colleague, David Schiffman, who was on the Twitter paper with he's a PhD student at the University of Miami, and his Twitter handle is Why Sharks Matter, and that's the topic of his dissertation. He's looking at how people use social media to discuss sharks and sharks conservation. And I know he has IRB approval to do that research. He's not at my university, so I don't know how he was able to get that through there, or how he framed the argument, but he does have IRB approval to do it, and so he is able to go and conduct, social interaction and social research in a university-approved fashion. I don't know if you guys... It's possible. Okay.
I'm going to interject with one question from the web from Jinjack Geisking. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She's on Twitter at JGIESEKING. And her question for the panel is, what have you just heard that most shifts your own perspectives and work?
I thought your project was super cool. Especially, I really, really liked how you were able to use both groups in Fiji and in Chicago in a very complementary way, rather than, I mean, it's whenever there are study abroad type projects, being from post-colonial studies, it always has this tendency to become this colonial endeavor of like helping poor people or something. And the way in which you structured the project, giving both teams equal weight in actually shaping the look and everything about the project was masterful, I thought. I mean, I want to do that. I want to find a way to do that, to be able to have interactive spaces with other students in different classrooms around the world, the way that you did.
For me, what's remarkable is to get to be on a panel with people outside of the humanities and to hear that science is trying to prove that Twitter, has a significant role in scholarly work, that we would just sit around and talk about it and maybe write some articles about it, but that scientists are actually systematizing that question of the role of Twitter and social media in scholarly production. That's really exciting to hear. Hopefully we'll benefit from it.
And I love the idea of humor and gameplay to approach difficult subjects. We tend not to use humor formally in natural science. There's a couple of sort of great science comics out there, but I think that's a great way, just from a teaching perspective, to approach big questions and big thorny issues in a way that lowers your shields. You don't come in on, I'm a Star Trek fan, so you don't come in like I'm big, on red alert with phasers ready and shields up. You sort of bring it down and allow people to poke fun at themselves and to sort of say, all right, that's kind of silly when you put it that way. Let's have a conversation about it, as opposed to people coming at oppositional views, going head to head. I think that's a wonderful way to sort of make your point and to engender conversations where parties may not necessarily understand where the common ground is.
Go ahead, Laura.
I would just like to affirm what was said about these partnerships in the two different countries, in Chicago and Fiji. I did know that it was possible, and it's wonderful to see a really good example. And so I can't say that I didn't know about it, but it was a wonderful example, and I hope that it will encourage people to do more of that. It struck me when I was at the University of Illinois last week that many people are quite nervous to instigate these kinds of partnerships because of their concerns, and very good concerns. But go ahead, do them, and do them with respect, and I think wonderful things can happen.
Okay. Hi, I'm coming down from the medical center, which sometimes seems only slightly nearer than Cape Town. And the focus up there, well, at least as far as I know, has been to use social media for patient recruitment, for research recruitment above anything else into research studies. And finally, I guess beginning to use social media to do research, to make an app for a patient to take home and record various things. And this has been eye-opening because I will take this back to faculty affairs, because clearly there's a whole other realm of things we can do with social media. But I was wondering, again, when I see research and social media in the same title, I think recruitment, recruitment, recruitment. And I wondered if any of you had any thoughts on recruiting through social media.
Colette, are you still here?
Yes.
Do you want to handle that? Because that's what your dissertation was on. So audience participation time. Colette Sosnowi is in the back, and she did her dissertation on looking, oh man, I have to remember, looking at MS?
Yes, blogs written by women with multiple sclerosis. So I'm not sure that this is really entirely going to get to what you were talking about. So you were asking using social media for recruitment? To recruit people. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to speak to Twitter since that's not what I used, but I was studying blogs, and so my sampling strategy was identifying, first of all, starting off by identifying what parameters I wanted to look at. So for instance, I was looking at women with MS, their experience, and how they were sharing that. And so it was similar in a sense to like the growth of our Twitter community of just like, you know, then seeing who they're linked to and who they're linked to and who they're linked to and they're linked to, and then that sort of saturated my sample, and I got enough, and then I just reached out to them directly. So there's a lot of different ways that it can be approached, I think, and some, you know, some of which the panelists today have touched on with, you know, just putting it out there and then seeing what comes of it, which definitely will be something, a good place to start. Sure.
Hi, my question initially goes to Laura because you mentioned it, something having to do with an ability that feature phones have. I'm looking to engage a lower income American audience who may not have cell phones. Could you tell me more about what that capability was that you were referring to? And then for the rest of the panel, if you're familiar, please weigh in.
So really any phone that has access to wireless can do an enormous amount. That's really the distinguishing consideration. And the particular thing I was talking about is a tool called Mixit, which is MXIT, which is online chat that is essentially free and is used for teaching maths, drug counseling, rape counseling, and all sorts of incredibly innovative ways in South Africa. But as soon as basically if there is some access to Wi-Fi, there is a range, there really are enormous possibilities.
The 3G network wasn't that well developed. And we were still able to use Twitter, and I was actually able to tweet the expedition to Papua New Guinea the same way, because if you send a tweet to 414141, I believe, you can engage Twitter through SMSs. So you still have the cost of sending a text, and I'm not sure if they have an unlimited text plan or not, but I mean, I was getting these like cheap disposable flip phones that were not web enabled whatsoever, and I was still able to use Twitter, and that was one of the reasons why we went with that platform, because it didn't require having web capability, and I could tweet from, you know, 20 miles offshore as long as I could get a direct line of sight to a cell tower, and that worked out really fine. It's not as flashy as the web interface, but you can still send and receive. For instance, we were out fishing, and this is in PNG, and the Bears were in a playoff game, and we were getting Bear scores updates in the middle of Bootless Bay, Papua New Guinea, because we were all from Chicago, and our friends knew that we were interested about this. And so we had that sort of interactive nature, despite being in a very, very low-tech environment.
I would also add that there are, at least for digital humanities, and this, I imagine these tools could be of use for social scientists and natural scientists. But if you look at bamboo dirt, you can Google it. There's just a repository of tools for really, I mean, so you imagine what you could do, you know, with a text or with an idea, and there are tools there that'll tell you exactly, you know, if you want to, can you help me with an example, Adeline? If you want to visualize your data, you can click on that, it tells you a free tool to use, and there's so much that's available just freely on the web. And I have a student population that is sort of not a super high income student population, and so I'm very cognizant when I use tools in the classroom to make sure they're going to be something that's not going to cost the students money, and that's not going to have a huge learning curve, and that you know, they can access easily on any computer, even if they don't have one. And so that's a really wonderful collection of tools that are available, you know, across the web that can be incorporated. And I imagine they could be incorporated into studies as well.
Okay, so Joshua has mentioned one of the caveats of social media, and that is the, ranting, and then we've got trolls. But what about the familiarity that social media breeds? That can be a problem, particularly for those academics who sit on selection committees. What pitfalls do you see or have you experienced?
I got unfriended by a lot of people when I applied for this job here. I did my master's at Columbia, and I had a lot of people who were very powerful and important mentors in my academic career who are faculty members here. And when it was time, when they saw that I was on the short list, they unfriended me. And I think that was the absolute right call, because you need to maintain a personal and professional distance. And they were evaluating me based on my CV and by my application, and not on the personal profile. And I would urge that, to be cognizant of that. We have at my old school, we had a social media TA policy where we weren't supposed to engage with students on professional social media accounts until they graduated. And then after they graduated, they were alumni, and you could engage them however you wanted. But they strictly brought about this segregation so that there was a professional space and there was a personal space.
On a different note, something that I try to keep in mind is how much of my research am I going to give away for free on the internet? Not in the sense that I'm really worried about somebody stealing it or scooping me, but in the sense that ideally would like to publish it in academic journals, and how much exposure is too much, whether it's a blog post or an extremely long set of tweets. And so that's a pitfall that I think I try to be cognizant of. I want to be open about it. I'm working on a project on the global W.E. Du Bois and the global ramifications of his work, and I want to talk about it and I want to be open about it, but at the same time, I would like to get it published sometime in the next decade as a monograph. And so, there's a sort of a balance there about trying to engage with people who are doing similar work and have really productive conversations and collaborations, but without kind of giving it all away for free, I guess.
And also using Twitter, I actually use Twitter a lot in my classrooms. So I have regularly scheduled Twitter assignments, and I found them to be really useful for teaching students films, especially. I have students live tweet films as part of an assignment, and everybody has to tweet at the same time using the same hashtag. And what I really like about it is that I can intervene. While they are watching the film, I can direct their attention to pay attention to something that they may be missing if they're just watching it passively. So how I deal with that issue is that I require all my students to create a public account. They can use one that they already have if they are comfortable with it, or they can create one under alias, just so they let me know. Just so long as it's public and they let me know what the handle is. Nobody's required to follow each other. Everybody just participates using the class hashtag. So that's how I navigate that issue.
Yeah, just one last quick thing, and Andrew can talk about this too. Last year, right after Sandy, many students had difficulty getting into Columbia because of all the infrastructure damages, and I actually was able to teach our class via Twitter. So I uploaded all the slides to Figshare, and everybody, I had everybody create a Twitter account, and we basically just taught the class in 140 character bits. But I thought that was a really great way to make sure that we could sort of get back to normal and have classes, even though the trains weren't running and the bridges were out.
Hi, this is a question for the whole panel, and but it's prompted by what you just said. That's amazing that you taught a class with 140 characters or less. Can the panel answer the question of preservation? Where are some of these things being archived? Are you archiving them in chunks, or is this part of your thinking on the use of social media?
whenever there's a discussion that's worth archiving, either a specific class or just a really, really interesting interaction, I try to use commercially available programs just to sort of archive and curate. And Storify is nice because you can sort of annotate stuff and you can bring in other aspects than just the tweets. But I think there's other ones out there. If you guys know, I'd love to hear.
I use Storify as well. I also end up favoriting a lot of things, and I never get back to them, and I never find them again. But recently in Prof Hacker, on the Chronicle of Higher Education, there was a great post by Lee Bissett about different services that will allow you to retrieve your favorited tweets, and so that's something I'm hoping to get into and to find all these things I know I saved for myself because I thought they'd be important for later, but they've disappeared into the Twit stream.
Another really useful service is IFTTT, if this then that. It allows you to create recipes, they're called recipes, so that if something happens on one platform, you can trigger something to happen on another platform. So I have it set up such that if I tweet something I want to remember, I have it set to a certain hashtag, and when IFTTT sees that I've used that hashtag, it will create an Evernote note for me, so I will instantly have it. Yeah.
So I think that's a really, really interesting question, and I'm curious that all the replies were individual replies, that the academics feel responsible for that preservation. I think it's a question for universities and institutions. And I don't know whether there's anyone present there from the Columbia University Library, because it certainly raises some really serious challenges about institutional responsibilities around preserving scholarly communication. So I'd be interested to know what a librarian's response to that would be.
Which librarian wants to step up?
I'm the web archiving project.
Okay, the web archiving project person.
So this is a great question, and I think this is a place where I'd like to have a longer conversation with anyone interested. At this point, we don't have a mechanism for collecting social media content of this kind, but this is a really rich point for building a web archive. So I will, how should I communicate Twitter? How to reach me. I'm Anna Perici, it's ANNA .PERRICCI, and that's my Twitter account, so please tweet me. And Rebecca.
And I just want to add that we, as a regular practice in the Center for Digital Research and Scholarship, which is within the libraries, I'd like to point that out, that we actually do regular Twitter archives as a data set that's within Academic Commons as well. So we do have not regular practice necessarily on doing that, but as much as possible. So I'm sure you can look forward to seeing the very wonderful Twitter conversation that's happened here as part of Research Without Borders that will be preserved for the long term. So we're doing a little bit there, Laura, but not as much as we could, I think.
Hi, my name is Amy Nurnberger. I'm also with Cedars. And if you are interested in doing your own Twitter archives, I would highly recommend the Google spreadsheet script done by M. Hoxie. His Twitter handle is @MHAWKSEY. And he's who we usually use to put together our Twitter archives for that kind of thing. And it's a great script, and you can set it up for a keyword or a search. So if you wanted to collect all of your tweets about a class on that hashtag, it's a really good tool for doing that type of thing.
Will it do it retroactively, or will it do it only going forward?
It will do it retroactively for up to a certain period, and he has that documented so you can take a look at it.
Are there any more questions? Is that it? Okay. This has been such an amazing discussion, both in this physical place and in the Twitter space. Thank you so much, Laura, Joshua, Rupika, Adeline. An amazing, amazing talk. Please continue the conversation online, Twitter. Don't forget to use the hashtag, and someone will be responding, following up, and of course, we expect you'll be communicating with each other. Thank you.